All right, I'm joined by my colleague Alex Sear, who rushed back from the Niagara Falls View Casino and Resort late last night after watching the Black Eyed Peas in order to do this instant reaction podcast. I woke up at 2 a.m. Eastern time, 3 a.m. Atlantic time, where I am right now in Nova Scotia on vacation, supposedly with my family, in order to watch the men's Olympic marathon live in Paris. And we're going to talk all about it. Let's break it down, Alex. We'll go through how the podium shook out, the big performance of the day, obviously by Tamirat Tola of Ethiopia. What the heck happened to the GOAT, Eliud Kipchoge, and how this affects his legacy moving forward. And some other notable results, including obviously the top Americans. But I think the first thing we need to talk about, Alex, is watching this race. I was most excited, actually, beyond just sort of seeing how the race was going to unfold, as to like what this course actually looked like, how it profiled on camera, and how the IOC, the broadcasters, the world feed was going to display what sounded like a really beautiful course. I think they like totally delivered. I think this was like a pretty stunning event to watch visually for 2 and change hours.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think what the marathon broadcasts are starting to figure out is that like you can't really do a whole race just showing the 2-3 people running in the front. You have a little bit more depth of field, I guess you'd call it. And that's what's cool, because as I'm a Canadian, people are watching from everywhere. You want to see your own horses in the race along with the leaders. And I think they did that in terms of the field, but also in terms of catching the tough parts of the course. And it delivered. We were talking before this podcast. You said only 9 people dropped out. And I was like, well, that's like 1 in 8 runners, Olympic runners dropped out. So this was no easy course, not an easy day.
That's a good point. That's like, quick math here. That's about 10% dropout rate, which is actually probably quite high, even for the elite end of a race, something you only see in the much tougher courses like Boston or New York. And for all the lead up to this race, there's been a lot of hype and a lot of points of comparison. In our preview pod, we went into the nitty gritty of the profile of the course, the complexity of the course, how challenging and hilly this course is, how it compares to the infamous Newton Hills of Boston, and the overall twists and turns and ups and downs of New York, and how in many respects it's much harder. I think that was meted out and like viewed in real time in this race, where we'll get into the specifics of the race in a second here, but really where the race was broken wide open in a couple of different fronts was during these really tough hilly stretches. And I think what's really challenging when you're photographing, when you're creating the TV show that is watching a marathon, it's really tough to show just how tough a hill is, right? Because it's tough to get that perspective. The camera kind of like crushes the perspective. So it's hard to see just how steep a grade it is. And in this case, kudos to the broadcasters. I mean, holy shit, man. Like, especially that hill at 28 and change kilometers, the 600-meter monster climb they had to do, which they have now dubbed the wall. I mean, they did a very good job of showing way back in the distance just what the runners were facing and seeing as they're heading towards this massive hill. And then they got these really cool shots from the motorcycle cameras, like these side shots of the leader Tamirat Tola and others just like working it hard up the hill. Like it kind of looked like I would comp it to like a paved mountain running race. Like it looked legitimately super tough what they were doing.
Well, the grade was 13%, right?
Yeah.
Like, seriously, try this at home. Like, if you're curious, if you missed the marathon or you're just curious of what that feels like, find a treadmill, crank the incline up to 13 and run on it for 600 meters. It probably took them a minute and a half to get over this. For you, it probably would take you more. Pump it up for 2 minutes and see what that feels like at the middle of a marathon, at the point where things are starting to get hard. I could see how this was a total mental battle for these guys.
Yeah, so let's go through that. I mean, we're obviously going to spoil the race. So if you haven't watched the Olympic marathon yet, maybe hit pause in the pod, watch at least the highlights, and then we're going to jump right into it here because we're going to walk through it a little bit in detail. So started at 8 a.m. local time, which sounds nice and early, but is actually pretty late, particularly for an August marathon, because it was 23 degrees Celsius, that's 74 Fahrenheit, and the humidity level was pretty high. I think I clocked it at about 76% humidity at the start. And the temp just kept going up from there. And you could tell, like, these guys were sweaty throughout this race. I remember at one point on the broadcast, they showed Canadian Cam Levins, and he's wearing the white singlet, the red Canadian, the maple leaf shorts, and a white hat. And he looked like he jumped in a pool. He was like absolutely soaked. And this was before the halfway point in the race. So like humidity, heat played a huge factor, obviously the complexity of the course, but we had a big pack for at least the first 10 or 15K of this race. It was, I had a difficult time counting how many athletes were in this lead pack in the beginning. It was 30 to 40 athletes. It was pretty much half the field was in it. Pace was pretty pedestrian when you think about the types of times we're seeing being put down regularly by the elite of the elite and the distance running world. They're pacing out at between 2:06 and 2:10 pace throughout the first chunk of this race. One interesting little tidbit, it seems to happen in all of these championship style races, is a relative unknown, Eliud Kipchoge broke away and decided to run his own race for a few kilometers, Italian runner, and maybe tried to make this a little bit of an honest race, right? And that's where I think the complexity of the course and the narrative we got to see play out sort of unfolded, because Tamirat Tola of Ethiopia, spoiler alert, our 2024 Paris Olympic gold medalist, made the big move to close the gap on him.
Look, I'll just say, you don't even have to watch the race or listen to this podcast. Listen to the preview podcast. I already told you that Tamirat Tola was going to win. That's all you need.
Oh, man, you're taking the bow now, are you? You're going to...
Yeah, I couldn't resist.
Yeah, we should say for listeners that kudos to Alex. You're on fire with your picks, and Tamirat Tola was your dark horse pick to win this race. So my hat's off to you. You should have bet on this. You'd be a little wealthier today than you were yesterday.
Yeah, well, of course, Tamirat Tola got into the race because his countryman Cisse Lema pulled out. And I think just that changed the dynamic of the race in the first part of the race, not because of Tola's inclusion, but because of Lema's exclusion. You see all these runners coming to this course that people have dubbed as a really difficult course for over a year now. I can see how everyone's apprehensive. You will need someone to take the lead, and it was the Italian runner who did it. But I would have pegged Lema to do it otherwise. I remember watching him run Boston, which is not as tough a course, similarly a tough course, and he didn't have any reservations. He took the lead from the start and broke it from the start. And I feel like without Lema in the field, there wasn't that type of urgency from anybody. And even with our Italian runner, he wasn't one of the top contenders. So I think maybe he didn't inject as much anxiety in the field as someone like Lema might have. So we were found with much more of a conservative race, at least in the first part, right?
There was a funny moment with Finial way out in front. I think they gave him something like 20 seconds on the field. They let him go ahead and they just ran their own pace. And at one point, Finial there's a motorcycle cameraman pacing him, like right next to him. And he looks at the camera and he just points to his watch and kind of gives a shrug like, listen, man, I'm just running the time that I came here to run. And everybody else is like screwing around back there and being very, very, very langent with their pace. So he's like, I'm just going to run my own race here, which you see often in these non-time trial type races like a Boston or New York. You'll see somebody go out and they'll just be like, I'm fit to run a 2:06. I'm going to run a 2:06 today, and everyone else can do whatever the hell they're doing, and I'm just going to stick to my plan. Didn't pay off for him. He ended up 43rd place overall, so he definitely faded in the second half. The hills were not kind to him, I don't think. He wasn't even the first Italian to cross the finish line, which is tough. But so this big section that we talked about in the preview, the 14 kilometers to about 20K, where there's 500 plus feet of climbing and a 2.5% grade, really kind of shook the race up. And that's where you saw Tola of Ethiopia, Jaleta, his Ethiopian teammate, Benson Kipruto, who was one of the favorites going in, former Boston and Chicago winner, and Tokyo winner from earlier this year. And then even Connor Mance of the US kind of got in the mix a little bit there and was kind of right in it and got a lot of screen time and ended up finishing well. We'll talk about the Americans after. But, okay, let's first go into, well, let's talk Tola. Then let's talk Kipchoge, because I think that was the big question mark. And, you know, maybe he's taking up too much oxygen for someone who didn't have a great day. But let's talk Tola here. Real quick, let's do a little legacy check-in, a little rundown. Tamirat Tola, the guy turns 32 tomorrow. So, like, what an awesome way to celebrate your birthday. Hanging out in Paris with a gold medal around your neck for the biggest, arguably the biggest event in the games is the marathons, right? So,
yeah. So
he's got a 2:03:39 from a couple of years back at the Amsterdam Marathon. It's a pretty decent personal best. I mean, it's not, I don't know where it ranks all time. It's not super high up all time, as the world record is edged very close to the 2-hour barrier. Bronze in Rio in the 10,000 meters. World champ from the 2022 marathon in Eugene. Silver medalist at London Worlds in the marathon 2017. Came fourth place 2018, 2019 in New York. 2022 Tokyo Marathon, third place. 2023 London Marathon, third place. 2023 New York City Marathon winner. Set the course record, 2:04:58. Still stands, obviously. And DNF'd in Budapest at Worlds, which I'm sure he'll want to forget. But then he wins Paris. So, like, that's a pretty good resume. I'm not sure we're going to start carving out his face for the Mount Rushmore of men's marathoners, but he's an impressive performer and someone you definitely have to factor in specifically with these really challenging courses.
Yeah, and I can't believe that a guy like that was left off the Ethiopian team, which is a testament to how deep of a marathoning nation that is. You wonder if they gave the nod to Kenenisa Bekele thinking of his past results as opposed to his present ones. But you look at Tola and I don't know how many people fit in. There's 4 faces in Mount Rushmore. Is that right? Yeah, I don't know if he fits. That's pretty exclusive, but this guy's a total gamer. He's proven himself at majors, worlds, and Olympics. I mean, there's a reason I picked him, right? He rarely underperforms, and maybe the Ethiopian selection committee was looking at his performance at Worlds last year, but everyone has bad races. It was clearly his to win today.
Yeah, and we should say that neat little factoid here. I believe this is the first time the Ethiopian squad hasn't had a DNF in an Olympic marathon or a Worlds marathon in, like, I think it's something like 20 years. It's a really long time because there's that incredible pull to drop out of the race at around 20 miles or 32K, 30K. When you're thinking about the fall and these summer marathons, these championship marathons where you know you're not going to medal, maybe you're not even going to finish top 10. You're having the old bad day at the office and you step off the course and you think about, I'm going to run a fall marathon, make a little bit of money. And none of these guys did that, including Kenenisa Bekele, 39th place, 42 years young, finished in 2:12:24. Obviously not delivering on the hype going into it. Maybe there was more hype than there should have been. But, you know, I'll give him credit. He finished. And that's more than I can say for Mr. Kipchoge, which we'll get into in a second here. But let's finish off the podium. Let's give these guys their due. Bashir Abdi of Belgium ran an awesome race and really captured, I'd say, like the spirit of the marathon at the finish line. Man, like he was like crying and like yelling and absolutely jubilant with the Belgian flag in the finishing chute. and just like couldn't get over the fact that he had done what he did, finishes with a silver. And he really like put together a cool class 5K because he was in tough. There was 3 guys passing the Eiffel Tower with a couple of miles to go. And they were in this like battle where 3 guys, 2 medals. And it was him. It was Benson Kipruto, and then Gilletta of Ethiopia was in there too. And what ended up shaking out was Abdi surged with a couple of K to go because he's just like, I want the silver medal and it's there for the taking and I'm going for it. So he went for it. He gets silver. And then crossing the line in third is Benson Kipruto, puts together a great performance as well. Kudos to him. He's had such a nice last couple of years. And then after that, Gilletta, who was sort of the 4th place guy, fades back. And we get some pretty nice performances in the top 10. But before we get into the top 10, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Let's talk about Kipchoge. Yeah. So
highest profile DNF, obviously, of this race.
Yeah. So he dropped out at 31K. Apparently, because we kind of lost him on the broadcast after a while, there was some updates, but it was unclear. We didn't get a split after 30K. Let's just go through it here. 5K opening split, 15:41. He's in 8th place, but he's just in that lead pack. He was sitting sort of featured right in the front of that pack for much of the first 5 kilometers. 10K, same thing. He's right in there. 15K, same story. So first 15K, pretty good. 20K, by the 20K mark, he's well off. I think he's over a minute and a half back. He's 1:02:28. He's in. They place him on the mat at 48th place. So he's just completely dropped back. So that 14 to 20K stretch, when it got hilly, broke the guy. There's a shot of him. They did the broadcasters did a really great job. The producers captured this moment of him grabbing his left hip and talking to a runner that was pacing along with him well back of the pack. And he was basically saying like, my day is done. Something's bothering me. Later, he reports in the mix zone that he had lower back pain, and that caused him to DNF. Gets a half split, so he's splitting about 2:12 pace, 58th place. Then in 25K, 63rd. He goes over the 30K mat, and he's 71st, and he's done. Apparently, the very last finisher in the race passes him, and then he walks. Check this. He walks for like I think a kilometer on the course before actually fully stepping off. And like 300 people, apparently, according to him, 300 people join him walking with him. It's like
spectators?
Yeah. Like people on the road that were following the course, following the race. Oof. And he starts taking off. He takes his shoes off. Cause like the first thing you kind of want to do after you've run a marathon is like get those friggin' super shoes off your feet. Yeah. Cause they can kind of really mangle your feet, right? Takes his shoes off, takes his socks off, takes his singlet and his bib off, and he's giving this stuff to the people and the spectators on the street. People are asking him for this stuff, and he gives him this. Some person in Paris has got Eliud Kipchoge's shoes because he just
sock
and left sock. Yeah, I wonder if they like tore it apart. I've got a part of the left sock
and sell it on eBay or something. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. Like how are you gonna prove that? It's like this is a Kipchoge size 9 Nike sock. Yeah, so he gave away all of his stuff. He finally gets picked up by like a sweeper vehicle, a van, from the IOC. They collect him, and he's just in a pair of racing shorts. That's it.
No shirt, no singlet, no anything.
No socks, no shoes, nothing.
God, and that's like sad.
It's sort of like the man has just like washed himself clean. There's really like kind of weird like religious connotations to that, right? You know, he's like this Jesus-like figure walking in his darkest moment, and his parishioners like join him, and his disciples are following him, and he's like taking off all of his worldly possessions that, you know, I mean, he's the Nike guy, right? You know, the Nike, I don't want to get too literary here, but like, the shoes on his feet are in part his doing, right? The fact that all these people are well ahead of him now, as we talked about in the preview, he's sort of like, this is the house that Kipchoge built, the super shoe era, right? So that has enabled so many athletes to have big breakthroughs. And the guy is just left on the course. Everyone has left him in the distance, and he's walking practically naked, barefoot, with like the people, Wow. Yeah. So he said, here's some quotes from the mix zone that I pulled. Other runners were telling me to push on, but I was telling them, no, I have pain. I can't. I could feel the love and respect from them. Fucking guy.
These runners are just pumped that they're getting the scalp on them.
Yeah. And then here's another one. Today, you'll love this, Alex. Today was a tough day at the office. He used a tough day at the office.
Oh, wow. He's digressed to metaphors now.
He's used the old Strava excuse. It was a tough day at the office. I'm sure it was. I mean, that's just a tough, humiliating. I mean, you put in all this training. This was sort of the culmination of the career, right? And he says here, you can train for a very long time, but one day it can happen. It's like boxing. You can go to a training camp for 5 months and then be knocked out in 2 seconds, but life will continue. Yeah. So he did acknowledge, this is my worst marathon. I have never done a DNF. And then he says, that's life. Like a boxer, I have been knocked down. I have won. I have come 2nd, 8th, 10th, 5th, but now I did not finish, and that is life. So there you go.
Now people will ask questions of legacy, right? What's next?
Okay, let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah, I kind of feel it's crazy to say that someone who's won so much, who already has 2 Olympic gold medals, needs redemption or could benefit from any type of redemption. It's like he could have retired 2 years ago after setting the world record, and he would still be known as the Yoda that he was known at, or maybe he still is known as to some people. But that's the devil of the sport. It's like the longer you stick around, the more chances that you have of what's the thing? You can die a hero, or you can stick around long enough to become the villain. And I feel like that's what happened. That's what happens to runners as they stay and things get tougher. And we saw it with Kenenisa Bekele. It's harder to stay healthy as you get older. That's just how it is. So, and for someone like Kipchoge, who doesn't seem to have many aspirations of retirement, he wants to keep going for as long as he can. It's just going to get tougher and tougher. I want to see a redemption as much as someone else, but it's crazy to say that he might need it to keep his legacy. It feels ingracious or ungrateful as fans to say something like that. He's already accomplished so much.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot this morning, and did the scan of his resume. I mean, it's jaw dropping. He's won 11 marathon majors, 2 Olympic golds from the previous 2 Olympics. This is his first DNF. He's like only lost, quote unquote, because either win a marathon or you're one of the 30,000 other people who ran a marathon. And he's only lost 4 marathons of all the races that he's run. I believe he's run, well, let's do the math here. He's run 15 marathons now. So, and I mean, if you go back here on the losses, it's 2nd marathon he ever ran in 2013 in Berlin, and he finished 2nd place. And that was behind Wilson Kipsang, who set the world record on the day and was also a doper, turns out. So then he had that kind of rather ugly 8th place in London in 2020 during COVID, and that very strange elite only looped course around the park by Buckingham Palace in London, and St. James Park. I was like, what's the name of that park? St. James Park. And that day was very reminiscent to today in terms of like just a niggle started to grow into something bigger. He wasn't having a good day at the office, and he just started to fade and then kind of threw in the towel. And then similar scenario in Boston last year, 2023, where he finishes 6th. And the questions about whether or not he's just, like, as you pointed out in the preview, is this guy more of a time trialer, or is he actually someone who can deliver on the biggest stage regardless of what the complexities of the race are. And I think that's the big question mark for his legacy at this point, unfortunately. You know, he's won London 4 times, Berlin 5 times, Tokyo and Chicago. What do all those courses have in common? 2 things. They're flat and they have pacers. So
what does he have to do to rectify his legacy if that's even accurate? Like, does he have to win another Olympic title? Does he just have to show up to one more major and win another one?
I think 4 years is a long time, and he will be 43, almost 44 years old for the Los Angeles Olympic Games. And the Kenyan squad is the toughest squad in the world to crack. And who knows what happens? Does he go Bekele on us and keeps going and is just looming around and puts together a good marathon in the fall, winter, spring of 2027, 2028 or not? I don't know. I doubt that. My curiosity is, okay, he stepped off the course at 31 kilometers, which I said before is kind of like that spot where a lot of elite athletes in championship races step off, because that just turns into a really gritty long run for them, for their body. And maybe if the injury is not significant, got New York in November. You know, it's the one major marathon that Eliud Kipchoge has never run? New York City Marathon. What a redemption story would that be if he was able to somehow pull off winning the New York City Marathon this fall? That would mean that he has won every single major save for Boston. If he was able to pull that off, that would be a way to salvage this late career hiccup that we're now seeing with him. But I think GOAT status, like he's your, who's the number one Rushmore guy? He's your George Washington, your Abe Lincoln on Mount Rushmore for sure for the men's marathon. So yeah. Okay, so before we wrap this up, let's talk about some other notable results from, I think the New York Times called it in their headline, a captivating Olympic marathon. And I think captivating is the right term for this one. So Americans did pretty well. Connor Mantz, Clayton Young, both cracked the top 10. Mantz was just ahead of Young in 8th. Young's 9th, and 208.12, 208.44 are like really good times and really good performances given the day. Like I just took a quick look at the US trials times that they put up in March to qualify, and they ran 209.05 and 06 respectively to qualify. So like it's very close to what they've done previously. So do you think that that's like is that a win for American distance running? Is it just sort of like, is it kind of like what you expected, better than expected? Like how do you feel about it?
I think with the cards America had this year, it's a win. I don't think that they had a potential medalist. I just don't think that they had that top end strength. But in a year where they're not lukewarm of a team. It's a good team, but it's a strong field. But in a year where they're not expected to win, landing 2 guys in the top 10, I think is a win. I think America can leave. I mean, not just the men's marathon, but the whole athletics competition in general, America smashed. And I also think that they can be proud of their men's marathon.
Yeah, I think so. And I would say one great performance that will not get perhaps the recognition it deserves because he came in 4th, which is can be the toughest place. But I imagine Emile Caresse of Great Britain is super pumped about that 4th place because he was in like 6th or 7th place with just a couple of kilometers to go. And he was the guy who like, you know, it could go either way. And with those last couple of K to go, you could just hold on to your spot and be happy with 7th and be like, hey, I came top 10 in the Olympics. And instead he dug down pretty deep and passed the Ethiopian Jaleta, who had been in that chase group, as well as Akira Akasaki of Japan. And he finishes 4th, 207.29. I mean, that's an awesome performance for a pretty young marathon runner. And kudos to our teammate, Caitlin, who picked him as like a dark horse to make the podium. And she was awful close with that one.
Emile Caresse, I remember watching him qualify for the Olympics in London at the London Marathon. And that was a gutsy run. He did most of it running by himself. And just made it. And he's pretty new onto the scene. So I'm very, very interested to see what he can do in the next cycle. But yeah, he solidified himself as an absolute gamer and one of the best marathoners in the world. So that's my like, sometimes we do these like winners and losers columns. Emil Caress, major winner.
Yeah, I mean, if we're doing winners and losers off the top of my head, I'd say like obviously Tamirat Tola is our big winner of the day.
Yes.
You know, he's got the gold medal. I'd say Bashir Abdi is up there too. I'd say the Olympic movement, like the IOC, they put on a gorgeous race. It looked amazing. I think it really sold the importance and majesty of the Olympic marathon. It was very well photographed. I mean, the slow-mo shots were super cool. The course looked incredible. The Palais de Versailles from the big helicopter perspective, seeing the Seine, the Eiffel Tower, the Louvre pyramid, glass pyramid. I mean, it's just like the Bastille statue that they went around. I mean, just a really beautiful course. Paris was obviously the right pick for the Olympic Games. Incredible day. I don't know. Are there any other winners that we missed there?
I'm thinking more of the losers now. I don't think we have to get into it all that much. I think obviously tough day for Eliud Kipchoge, tough day for Gabriel Gay, who's lesser known, but also no slouch at all, a 2:03 runner from Tanzania who also was in the DNF columns. And take it how you will for Kenenisa Bekele. If you still accept the idea that he and Kipchoge should have been battling for the win, you will call him a loser at 39. Obviously not a literal loser, but someone who lost the event. But if you look at him as someone has incredible longevity, which he does, and who muscled out a really tough course marathon, I'm not sure if I would say that he lost this event. You know, there's some nobility in that. So tough day for Kipchoge, Gay, and the few others who weren't able to finish. As a Canadian, I feel for Cam Levins. I know we mentioned him in the preview podcast. He finished 36 and 2:11:56. One of the most talented marathoners in the world, a top North American coming into the race, and clearly didn't have the time that he wanted. So I'm sure that he'll take it tough. So I do feel for him as well.
Last loser that came to mind as I'm watching this, I'm watching these guys, the three podium finishers, standing arm in arm with their respective countries' flags draped around their shoulders. A full body shot that we actually have in our recap story is what's on their feet. And Nike did not make the podium at these Olympics. First time in some time. And just feels like if we didn't think there was a changing of the guard before with the super shoes, there definitely is now. We've been talking about this all year and how the latest version of the Alpha Fly shoe just hasn't been winning as much. And that could be just as much an issue with the athletes that they've backed as it is with the actual shoe technology itself. But two Adidas Pro Evo 2 probably shoes on the podium, winner, the winner and the second place finisher. No, and a third place, Bashir Abdi was in Adidas, your personal fave. Asics rather, Asics this year. And Emil Caress, also an Adidas athlete. I don't know off the top of my head. I'm just going down the top 10. Is Connor Mantz the first and maybe only runner in the top 10 that was wearing Nike? Now that may not be the case. There may have been a couple of the guys. The guy from Lesotho may have been wearing Nike. I just wasn't tracking that.
Clayton Young is Asics, yeah. And I think the Japanese runners were also Asics.
Yeah, Asics or Mizuno. I saw the shoe. I didn't mark it down, but it was certainly not a Nike shoe. So, I mean, that's really interesting from, we're shoe nerds. So that's really interesting from a shoe perspective. And we'll actually have a story about the shoes of the Olympics, the Olympic marathons coming up. Our colleague Jesse's writing that right now. Okay. Last thoughts here. Close things out. Looking forward to the women's marathon tonight / tomorrow for us, 2 a.m. Eastern time. Yet again, let's play it back, set the alarm. I'm going to watch it. I think I'll do it live. I feel like a little bit like I'm living in a parallel universe right now with the lack of sleep, but what are the takeaways here for watching this women's race? Now that we've got to see this race and this course and how the conditions affect all of this, what are we thinking here? Do we think, obviously, as you said in the preview, I think that someone like Tigges Desefa, the world record holder, I think these hills sort of like neutralize her speed.
You need more than a good personal best. You need more than a good time. To have success here, you need to be a gamer. So my takeaway is I would put my money on someone who's won in a lot of different conditions. To me, that's Hellen Obiri. I'll be looking at her. I think Sifan Hassan is a huge gamer. I also think she's exhausted from the 10,000 and the 5,000. Now that's 2 medals for her. She's going for her 3rd medal in the marathon. That's insane. I'd love to see her do well for the story, but it's like I almost can't see it. And then Perez Jepchirchir is a massive gamer. So she's the Olympic champion, the reigning champion from Kenya. So I would expect a Jepchirchir, Obiri, all Kenya battle in the front. That's my guess, but I'm ready for anything.
Yeah, it's tough to make a prediction, especially with such a unpredictable course, with so much undulation, and obviously heat and humidity at the start being a big factor as well. But I would say if you're watching either the race or the replay of the race tomorrow, tonight, whenever the hell it is happening now, beside myself, I would say you're probably expect to see a very large lead pack in the first 10K, much like with the men's race, where it's going to be pacing out in the maybe even mid 220s, 225-ish range, like closer to like what the Olympic qualifying standard is, close, kind of like with the men's race. And then keep an eye out on those hills. Those first section of hills between 14 and 20K might start stretching out the field. And then certainly that monster wall of 600 meters of very steep climbing at 28 and change kilometers probably will produce the big breakaway. And I like your picks there, Alex. I think Perez Jepchirchir and Hellen Obiri are 2 people to watch. Sharon Lokedi, who's won New York, is someone else to keep an eye on. But there may be a big group of people, and maybe obviously there might be some surprises in there as well. Okay, let's close this off for this instant reaction pod on the men's marathon. Alex, I think we got to do this for the women's race too. It would only be equitable and fair. And I think we're going to get our 3rd teammate, Caitlin Tossi, in there for it as well. I know she was dying to talk about this pod, but she's in the mountains of Costa Rica doing some crazy ultra running stuff today. So she wasn't able to join us, but she's going to join us tomorrow for our instant reaction pod. Keep an eye on the feed for that, like shortly after the race finishes in the morning on Sunday morning Eastern time. And if you don't already, if you're this deep in the pod, just subscribe to it and give us a rating if you can. It really helps us a lot. Okay, Alex, I'll talk to you tomorrow.